I felt that because we're coming up to Shavuos and we're not going to have an opportunity to learn again because next week, Bechlal, our short little mini series is over then, and we're going to seem to be taking a break for a bit for the summer. And anyway, I wasn't going to be available. I'm in Gateshead actually next Wednesday. Oh, Manchester is Wednesday and Gateshead is Thursday. So as Hashem could have us in mind for Hatzlacha. So I wanted to do something Shavuos related. I've been thinking obviously a lot about Shavuos. A lot of different events and different shiurim and different teaching opportunities, Be'ezus Hashem, coming up. And so I spent a long time this morning on the following, and I'm going to share it with you. It's a little bit different than what we're usually used to, and it's a different style, and it's a different wavelength, and it's incredibly deep and challenging. Maybe more so than everything that we learn, which is also incredibly deep and challenging. But this is particularly delicate. And so I'm going to ask from the outset for Siyata Deshmaya to be able to share this teaching with you. It's also a very long Indian, and we should be zoche to really have Godspeed, mamish, kfitzas haderech to get through it in the proper way. And what else? And that's it. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and we can look at the sources. And B'siyata Deshmaya, we're going to jump into this together. Okay, so this shiur, which I'll probably be giving at some point or another over Shavuos, is called Face to Face, the Essence of Kabbalas Torah. And wonderfully, it actually culminates in the Kedushas Levi, which hopefully we'll get to if there's some grand miracle where we make it to the end of this year. But let's just try to work through this with Hashem's help, open hearts, open minds, and I think that we can accomplish a lot with Hashem's help. Okay. Says the Gemara in Shabbos that many of us are familiar with. Shuv ma'aseh b'goy echad she'ba'alef nei Shammai. It's a story of a Gentile who comes in front of Shammai, Amar Loi, and tells Shammai, Gaireni amanashe talamdini kol parakula k'shani oymen al-regalachas. Very famous story. He says, "Will you please convert me to Judaism while I stand on one foot?" And as was the nature of Shammai, who is a more rigid, severe personality. Austere is the word I'm looking for. So he sort of pushes him away. He was a builder. He was holding a builder's ruler, whatever it was, a measuring stick, and he pushed him away. But he came in front of Hillel, Gyare, and Hillel just converts him on the spot. Amarlai, and he tells him, "You want to know the whole Torah on one foot? What you don't want being done to you, don't do to someone else." Zuhi kala Torah kula. That is the entire Torah. And it's something that many of us are familiar with this teaching, so we don't react with surprise anymore, but it's a shocking thing. Imagine reading that for the first time, That's the whole Torah. That's the whole Torah. The kala Torah kula is da'alach seneh, what you don't like being done to you. L'chavrach le'tavet, don't do it to someone else. The rest is just commentary, Zil Gemar, and now you can go and learn the commentary. But the essence of the Torah is this. And of course, the confounding question is, how? How is this Kala Torah Kula? What does this mean? That the essence of the Torah is Mada Allah Sabid, which, at least according to the Ramban, which we'll learn, is really the reverse of Yahafta l'reacha kamocha. It's the same idea. What you do love being done to you, do to someone else. Which, of course, the Medrash tells us in a different lashon, we have to the reacha kamocha zek klal gadol Torah, that this is also, in a sense, the encapsulation of the entire Torah. How are we to understand this? So here we want to present an idea with Hashem's help, and again, openness. The pasuk Devarim tells us, Panim bepanim dibra Hashem imachem bahar mitoich ha'esh. The pasuk describes the experience of Matan Torah as Hashem speaking to the nation, what's called Panim bepanim, face to face. What does this mean? Hashem speaks to Am Yisrael Panim bepanim, face to face, mitoch ha'esh. Now, there are any number of metaphors that ostensibly could have been used to describe the direct nature of the communication between Hashem and Am Yisrael. It could have taken a non-metaphoric route at all. It could have just said Hashem spoke to you directly. But the pasuk uses this word panim Panim, face to face. Again, what's going on here? So I want to share with you some lines from a very, very special, deep Jewish thinker by the name of Emmanuel Levinas. He was a French philosopher. He was a what's called a phenomenologist, interested in phenomenology, the phenomena of the lived experience. And the following lines that we're going to read together are from a collection of essays that he wrote on Judaism. Actually, toward the end of his life, after World War II, he became very interested in Gemara, and he began to reveal the most unbelievable chidushim from the Talmud, which was very, very unique for someone of his stature, not just in the Jewish world, but maybe primarily in the non-Jewish world. And he had a lot of interesting thoughts. He wasn't a religious Jew, not in the standard terms of today, but he had a tremendous amount to share. And like the Rambam tells us, Kabel emes mimisha amrai, we ought to be healthy enough and broad enough to accept the truth from whomever it comes. And so this is the following that he shares. We're going to read it together. Okay, it's dense. His philosophy is incredibly difficult, incredibly, and so I'm going to try my best to explain it, but let's work this through together. Okay? He writes, nothing is more ambiguous than the term spiritual life. What's the essence of ruchnius? What does it mean, spirituality? Could we not make it more precise by excluding from it any relation to violence? He wants to say that the antithesis of spirituality, if we were to abstract it and reveal what it is by defining its exact opposite, the exact opposite of spirituality is violence. Listen to how he develops this. But violence is not to be found only in the collision of one billiard ball with another. Now that's not just what we mean in this sense when he speaks about violence, or the storm that destroys a harvest, or the master who mistreats his slave, or a totalitarian state that vilifies its citizens, or the conquest and subjection of men in war. That's not that's generally what we mean when we say violence, but he's about to say that he's going to speak about violence as something completely different, what cuts to the core of the very concept of violence. Okay, so ordinarily we think of violence, we think of what violence is, right? A violent act or a violent experience. But he's now going to reveal a completely different definition of what violence really means, again, in its philosophical core. Violence is to be found in any action in which one acts as if one were alone to act. As if the rest of the universe were there only to receive the action. A violent act is to act, we're explaining outside now, a violent act is to act as if we have total allowance to completely and entirely act upon the thing to which we're acting without any consideration as to the impact of the action on the other thing. It's as if it doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. Violence is consequently also any action which we endure, right? Chas v'shalom, the violence is perpetrated against us without at every point collaborating in it. Meaning, ki'ilu, we don't exist. And he develops this idea to say that violence is impossible to be done to another human. What do you mean? Can't be violent to another human. All of us have, Rahman al-Islam, we've experienced so many experiences of one person being violent to another person. He says, not fundamentally. The violence that was done to that other person was only done after objectifying that other person. But essentially, you cannot do violence in this sense to another person because there's another person there. And the way that he describes this is the philosophy of the face. The face. The seat or the expression of presence. There's a consciousness here, not a thing. I have a face. So he continues, and I skipped that, I just selected some passages. The face is not the mere assemblage of a nose, a forehead, eyes. It's not what we mean when we say face. It is all of that, of course. But takes on the meaning of a face through the new dimension it opens up in the perception of a being. If there's a face there, you don't see a nose and a mouth and eyes. You look at a person's face, the whole person is there. There's a person there. Through the face, the being is not only enclosed in its form and offered to the hand, right? This is not just, oh, here's a face, so you can sort of feel it and relate to it. It is also open. Face is an open channel, establishing itself in depth, and in this opening, presenting itself somehow in a personal way. This is what a face is. The face is an irreducible mode in which being can present itself, and here's the key word, in its identity. That's the face. That's where your identity is. That's where your personhood is. That's where your consciousness is, your humanity is, in your face. A thing can never be presented personally and ultimately has no identity. It's just a thing, even very meaningful things. It doesn't have a face. There's no opening into its soul, into its essence. Violence is applied to the thing. It can be violent to a thing. It seizes and disposes of the thing because it had total control over the thing. It's as if the thing, vis-a-vis it's himself or herself, but more often himself, had no relationship. It's just a thing. Things give. They do not offer a face. They are beings without a face. Then he says something interesting. Perhaps art seeks to give a face to things. And in this, its greatness and its deceit simultaneously reside. And that's why people are so interested in paintings, because a painting is a thing that has a face, right? If it's a portrait. And that's sort of this interesting mix. Okay, let's move on. Just reading sentences by sentences, just this idea, he says a lot more, but just saying this idea. The face for its part is inviolable. You cannot violate a face. And again, in as much as a person does, then they weren't violating a face, weiter, that they objectified the thing or the person. Those eyes, he writes so beautifully, which are absolutely without protection, the eyes, the most naked part of the human body, so to speak, the most vulnerable. The eyes are the most open, vulnerable part of our bodies, nonetheless offer an absolute resistance to possession. The most vulnerable part of the human is the most intense encapsulation of that part of the person that cannot be possessed. It's almost teasing. It's like, come and try. But no matter how many chains a person is enslaved in, no matter what a person, the eyes belie that place within the person that's always free, because it's a person. You cannot completely subjugate that. It's free. It's essentially free. It's its own identity. It's its own consciousness. And he finishes, turn to the next piece. For in reality, murder is possible, right? Theoretically, a person could murder someone else, but it is possible only when one has not looked the other in the face. Because if that person would, in that moment, see the person there, how could a person ever kill another person? What gives them the right? That's not yours. That's not a thing. It can't be possessed. It can't be acted upon completely. The impossibility of killing is not real, right? Of course, people can kill one another, but moral, right? Philosophically, killing is impossible. The fact that the vision of the face is not an experience, but a moving out of oneself, a contact with another being, and not simply a sensation of self, is attested to by the purely moral character of this impossibility. It's morally impossible, because to see a face is to come out of oneself and realize that, oh, there are other people here. there are other considerations beside our desire for total imperialism, as it were. Okay, so this is the philosophy of the face. Very powerful, very beautiful, very, very, very elegant, I would say. That line, the eyes, the most vulnerable part of the person, are at the same time that part of the person that reveals the way in which they can never be captured, conquered, hurt, fundamentally. Take a look at source number 4. The pasuk of Bereshis, after the first sin in our world. And what I mean by that is, I mean, post the sin of Adam and Chava, which were in a different kind of reality, them having eaten the Eitz Hadas is what caused the revelation of our experience of reality. So the first sin that's recorded in the Torah in that new reality is the cardinal sin of Cain and Hevel, where Cain murders Hevel. Cain al Hashem. Cain comes to Hashem and he says, or at least that's what the pasuk says, he says, Gadol avayni minasai. My sin is too great to bear. Rashi tells us, based on the Medrash Rabbah, that Cain wasn't making a statement, he was asking a question. Bitmiya. He asked this as a question. Hashem, you carry heaven and earth. You're the place of the world. Everything that is within you. Can't you carry this sin? And the answer, of course, is no. Take a look at the source number 5, the famous Mishnah in Yuma, which tells us about Yom Kippur, that Aveiro shebein Adam lamakom Yom Kippur mechaper, the sins between man and Hashem, Yom Kippur can atone for, but Aveiro shebein Adam l'chaveiro, ein Yom Kippur mechaper, anti yiratzes chaveiro. Sins that are between one person and another person, meaning to say acts of violence or acts of cruelty that fundamentally undercut the existence of another person, which demands us to respond with a preservation of that person's dignity and selfhood. Yom Kippur is not mechaper. Yom Kippur is not mechaper for that. Cain, who has not yet learned the secret of the face, who sees Hevel as an object that he could choose to dispose of, simply dispose of, because he doesn't particularly like the fact of Hevel's presence in his world. Hevel enters into this conversation with Hashem, where Hashem says, this is on you. This is on you. Why? Why? Why does Hashem say this? Now, this is very, very deep. It's very deep. Take a look at the next pasuk. The next source is a pasuk in Mishlei, a very famous sources. The pasuk says, "Kemayim hapanim lepanim, kein lev ha'adam la'adam." Like water reflects itself to waters that reflect each other, kein lev ha'adam la'adam. So is the heart of one person reflective of the other person. Now listen carefully to this. This is maybe the most crucial and the most gentle, delicate part of this whole presentation. In as much as the person, Cain, in this scene, in this case, sees the other as an object, then not only are they objectifying and dehumanizing the other, but in that very moment, they're dehumanizing themselves. Not just in the standard sense of saying, this person's not acting like a human. It's deeper than that. Because there are two options. Either we're humans among humans, or we are in a category of our own, which precludes us from having the human experience. It's specifically kamayim hapanim lipanim. When we begin to see the face of the other, kain leiv ha'adam l'adam, then that we get a face. Because if they have a face, then I have a face. So again, it's not that, well, in as much as that person exists, so that negates my existence. Because again, the svara is maybe theoretically that before we get into this whole thing of the face, one person thinks that the whole world is mine. And I can act toward people, toward things, in whatever way that I choose, what he calls violence. And then I would think that the flip side of that is that I have no place. If you're telling me that I don't have the reign, so to speak, in this world to do what I want, so then where's my place? But there's a third option, and that's the truth. The truth is that in as much as a person recognizes the face of the other, so then you also have a face. You also have a place. And therein lies conflict resolution. Because in as much as they belong, you belong. Meaning as much as they have rights, you have rights. And then something structurally sound can be built there. Kimaim hapanim lipanim. When you find the face of the other, then you have a face. Kain leiv ha'adam la'adam. Then you're both humans. They have a place and a subjective revelation of the divine inside of them, as do you. And taking both of those factors into account, then we have to try to live our lives in relation to other people who have valid desires, like we have valid desires, but no more and no less. And that's what the pasuk means in the next thing. V'ahavta l're'acha kamocha ani Hashem. V'ahavta l're'acha kamocha. When we love our re'ah, when we love our fellow, when we see the face of the other, then kamocha, then you have a face. It's a symbiotic relationship. It's a shift not only in the way that we look at others, but memela, it reflects back on how we ought to see ourselves. They become more human, we become more human. V'ahavta l're'acha memela kamocha. So now let's go back. Now let's think much more deep. Why couldn't Hashem carry Cain's sin? Why is it that the Aveiro Shabin Adam lo Adam, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't just do away with? You know why? Take a look at the next source. Or it's not really a source, this little box. We have a cloud, we have a rule in Jewish philosophy that one of the reasons that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world is because Ein Melech below Am. There can be no king. Hashem cannot reveal his kingship below Am without the existence of a nation. Now, there are two prerequisites for a nation to serve its purpose as the nation toward which kingship is expressed. There's two conditions. Those two conditions are as follows. Really, there are more, but just for the purpose of this, there are two conditions. Number one, likeness. You can't be a king over sheep. You can be a shepherd over sheep. You cannot be a king or a queen over sheep. The human being can only be a king over other human beings. That's when you're called a king, right? A person has lots of servants. Well, we'll get to that. Oh, that's the next point. Okay, but right, human beings, that's likeness. And so if Hashem wants to be a melech, we in some sense are created in a likeness to him, kiviyachal. And it's Tselem Elokim, that is the human being. And there's another element. There's another element also of being a melech, and that is the willingness on the part of the people to make you their king. Because a dictator could be in control of a country, but he's not a king. It's not a king. He's a moshel. He's in control of that country, but he's not a melech. We say in Mariv, Umalchusai beratzain kibulu aleha. Am Yisrael received Hashem's malchus beratzain, with will, with desiring it. Malchusai beratzain kibulu aleha. It has to be willing. It has to be, and here's the key word, by choice. Now, if you think about it very deeply, these two things are inextricably linked based on what we just said. Because in order for us to be similar to Hashem Kiviyachol, that means that Hashem approaches us as a Panim, Selim Elokim. Hashem approaches us as his likeness, Kiviyachol. We have a face to Hashem, so to speak. Hashem doesn't look at us like things. Memela, Hashem can do no violence to us. Hashem doesn't look at us like things to be dominated. Hashem created us with dignity. Hashem created us with Tselem Elokim. Naturally, that opens the possibility for us to react toward Hashem with volition, with choice. So in as much as we are in Hashem's likeness, because Ein Melech B'loi Am, Hashem needs a nation, Kiviyachol, and the nation needs to be similar to him in order to serve as his kingdom, he has a face, so we have a face. Ya'er Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka, so to speak. We have the face of Hashem. Ki ba'or panecha nasata lanu, which we're going to get to in a minute. So by that very same token, Hashem cannot force anything on us. Hashem gives us space to choose, space to walk into the relationship willingly, without violence. And if you go back to what we just said about Cain, now we can understand on a deeper level why it was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu couldn't just do away with his sin. Because you know what that would be? You know what that would be? If Cain murders Hevel because he doesn't see in him a face, he sees him as a thing to be disposed of, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes down into Cain's life and he makes everything tidy for him. That would be the sin of Cain in a different form. That would be for Hashem an act of violence, in the sense that Hashem has total dominion over Cain's life, that there's no space for Cain himself to rectify what he broke. Unbelievably deep. So Cain doesn't see a face in Hevel and he takes his life. And then Cain comes to Hashem and says, Hashem, Gadol Abani Minasai, you can't carry my sin? And Hashem says, don't you get it, Cain? You're still with the same mentality. You see others as things, you think that I see you as a thing. I don't see you as a thing. No, I will not. Your Yom Kippur will not be mechaper for Averos of bin Adam la'Adam. Bin Adam la'Makom is a separate thing, but bin Adam la'Adam, that would itself be the subversion of the whole concept that there should be mitzvahs, bin Adam l'Chavera. If Hashem would come now and forgive the mitzvahs of bin Adam l'Chavera. Because the essence of what it is to have mitzvahs bein Adam l'Chavero is the prerequisite of seeing the face of the other. And Hashem says the only reason that you have a face and that the other has a face is because I have a face, and this is how I created all the dynamics of relationship, where we need to approach each other with respect, with a sense of dignity. Kamocha. When we approach our fellow and see the, so to speak, the face, which really means the Tselem Elokim, which really means the spark of divinity in them, which gives us a face, kiviyachol. So then Ani Hashem, then you can understand the dynamic in the upward, so to speak, direction of a relationship between humans and Hashem's the same way. So when we begin to see the face of the other, kamocha, and thereby we understand that we have a face, then you're ready to step into a relationship with Hashem, who intends to do no violence to us, and therefore makes it so that we ought do no violence to him, which we're going to get to in a minute. So likeness equals willingness. And now we can understand what the concept of the giving of the Torah was, which is the relationship that we build with Hashem. It's called, in the Lashon of the Gemara in Tainis, B'yoim Chasunasai, Zumat in Torah. It's called a wedding. A wedding connotes Panim b'Panim. It connotes two equal figures entering in to a symbiotic relationship, not because they're forced. There's no more oxymoronic expression than a forced marriage. If it's a marriage, it's not forced, and if it's forced, it's not a marriage. It's not like there's no such thing. It's not a marriage if it's forced. Just like a person is not a king if he forces people, to treat him like a king. He's a dictator. He thinks he's a king. It's not a marriage. B'yoim chasunasai is like equals. Zumat in Torah. And that gives rise to it conjures in our minds the concept of ani l'doidi v'doidi li. It's very equal. Hashem does not perpetrate violence against us. It's literally a Gemara. Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba b'trunya im briyasa. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't force anything. That's in the context of Allah said, love of the nations of the world, come and say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the same sugya. We don't really have time to get down to the whole thing. We have to end soon. The same sugya where the non-Jews come to Hashem and say, oh, very nice, you're giving Am Yisrael all this schar. What about us? Not fair. They got the Torah and we didn't get the Torah. So what should Hashem say? Knock them off. I mean, they're not part of the grand scheme of things. No. Says the Gemara, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba b'truni and briyasav. Hashem does not perpetrate violence against his creatures. He gives them a mitzvah, a sukkah. He gives them the choice to do it. And then invariably, they don't know how to handle sukkah. So there's a very, very deep thing about that. Essentially, what they're saying is, Ribono Shel Olam, you approached Klal Yisrael with recognition of their face. You offered them the Torah. You offered us the Torah too, but we didn't receive it. Can you give us another chance, right? Can you approach us as if we had a face? And Hashem says, sure, because Hashem doesn't perpetrate violence against his creatures. And in the same way, we ought not perpetrate violence against Hashem by turning him into a thing to be manipulated, a thing to be prayed to for our own needs, a thing to use to back and power our own motivations. Hashem is not a thing. Okay? Nobody has control of Hashem. Hashem is a being with a face. Hashem wants to be related to Panim el Panim, face to face. But you know who tried to perpetrate violence against Hashem? The Dar HaFlaga, the Migdal Bavel. That's literally what they tried to do. They tried to take possession of God. They tried to build a tower, and in some form or another, either through the statement of human civilization, which is one interpretation, or actually, I don't know what this means, climb up high enough, or they built a rocket, as one of the Mefarshim said, whatever it was. They intended to do violence against Hashem. Do you know where that came from? Listen carefully. The Arizal tells us that the Dar HaFlaga, which was the generation of the splitting, right, the splintering of languages, which happened from the the building of the Tower of Babel, was a reincarnation of the Dar HaMabel, the generation of the flood. And that generation came back in a Gilgal again, in the Dar HaMidbar, in the generation of the desert that received the Torah. Listen to the progression. We said before, via hafta l're'acha, that when one person sees the face of the other, you get a face, kamocha, and then you can understand the dynamic of our relationship with Hashem, ani Hashem. But it works backward too. What was the problem with the Dar HaMabel? Lack in bein adam lechaveiro. You remember how oshek asher biyadam, gezel, they were stealing from each other, they were treating each other miserably. So what started in the Dar HaMabel, meaning a lack of yahavta l're'acha, ended up in them losing their sense of face, and they turned that subjective sense of ability to do violence onto Hashem. And it became the Dar HaFlaga. It breeds a lack in bein adam lamako. Because when you don't see the other as what the other is, there's no way that we could approach Hashem in the proper way. And the third reincarnation is the Dar HaMidbar, which is the tikkun, the rectification, when we receive the Torah. Ba'or panecha nasata lanu, Toras Chaim, Toras Chaim. We receive a living Torah. Hashem says, I put before you today, ha'chaim v'hamaves hatov, I put in front of you today, ubacharta b'chaim, Hashem says, choose life. Not forcing anybody, because that would be violent to force. No, don't force. We give each person the ability to choose. Take a look at the Kedushas Levi, which brings us back to the beginning. Al pi ma'amar chachamenu zal the Gemara in Shabbos, shabat ger lehizgar lehillel. The ger came and asked Hillel to make him into a Jew. What does it mean to be a Jew? Right? Make him into a Jew. He said, teach me the whole Torah while I'm standing on one foot. So we already learned this in the first source. Hillel told him, what you don't want to be done to you, don't do to your friend, which again, the Ramban learns is via hafta l'reacha kamocha. Says the Berditcher, how does this work? How does this work? Why is this the essence of the whole Torah, the Idach Zil Gemara and everything else is a parish, is a commentary? Imagine a person does something for his friend. You give him something. And the person cares so little for you, chas v'shalom, not for you, but for the person that gave him something, or in the lashon of 11, that's what we read earlier, so doesn't see your face that no gratitude, no interest in relating to this person as someone who benefited them in a way that he ought to reciprocate, because there's no one else there. So it's like the other person is an object. Certainly the person will be very angry if their face is not recognized after they recognize the face of the other. So something that you drank from, you can't go and desecrate. Gratitude. So certainly the creator of heaven and earth, that Hashem gives us so much. The kind of mistalik, and the second that Hashem removes his presence from within us, it's like we're just a body without a soul. Hashem created us to come into a relationship with him. And Hashem is not going to, the human would consider not treating Hashem like a face, like a being who has a presence, whose presence demands something of me vis-a-vis the other. To enter into the covenantal relationship, the panim al panim relationship, that relationship of mutual respect. This person is doing what Hillel told this person not to do. What you dislike being done to you, don't do to the other. Which means don't be violent. Which means in the same way that we presume ourselves to have a face, we must see that in the other. And seeing that in the other, like we said, counterintuitively, paradoxically confirms our face, meaning our personality, our personhood, our identity. And the same dynamic, says the B'ditchever, applies between us and Hashem. We ought not, again, perpetrate violence against Hashem. Stepping into Kabbalah's HaTorah means to step into the dynamic of a relationship, b'yayim chasunasai ani l'doidi v'doidi li, in which, in the same way that I don't want someone to treat me without respect, I shouldn't treat Hashem without respect. Because he's the source of all faces. He is the source of all the special spiritual revelation of the human soul that gives every individual their face. He is the face of all faces, Kiviyach. Matat, one of the malachim that refers to Hashem's revelation in this world, is called the Sar HaPanim. He's called the minister of faces. That's where all faces come from. The divinity, the divine spark in the other. If a person wouldn't treat us with dignity, we would be angry. So then why are we not treating Hashem with dignity? Why aren't we recognizing his face, Kivyachol? Where Hashem has a stake in the human condition. Hashem cares about us. Hashem gave us the opportunity, the choice, the space to volitionally walk in and accept the Torah, each and every one of us, and we re-accept it every year, and really we re-accept it every moment of our lives. And Hashem is saying, so let's dance. Let's dance, meaning now there's a symbiotic relationship. Panim el panim dibra Hashem imachem, like we read earlier on in the sources. So a person should take a mashal from what goes on in this realm in the sense of being adam lechavero and then apply it to ben adam lamakom. And in so doing, the dar hamidbar that receives the Torah in a way of choice, nasa v'nishma, we chose it. Hashem didn't force us, even though it says Hashem held the mountain over our heads. Taisus and Shabbos deals with that. But really, we chose it freely. The Dar HaMidbar, in accepting the Torah freely, rectifies the Dar HaFlaga, which related to Hashem as an object, which all came about because of the Dar HaMabel, which related to other people as objects. And this is what Hillel was telling the Ger. We'd like to suggest that what Hillel was telling the Ger is Zuhi Kal HaTorah Kula. The essence of what it means to be a Jew is to be awake to the face of the other human, Nemela, naturally the face of Hashem, to preserve the dignity of every other outside of ourselves, whether it's another human or whether it's the creator of all humans. And this recognition of this shared dynamic is the pinnacle and the essential core of the entire Torah. Other consciousness, moving away from selfishness, moving away from violence. And that's why we're described as a nation of Rachmanim, Baishanim, Gomlei Chasadim. This is what it means to be a Jew, is to be Rachmanim, to be compassionate toward the other, to be Baishanim, to be people who are conscious of the other vis-a-vis ourselves, and Gomlei Chasadim, maybe in the broadest sense of the word, to give Hashem Kiviyachol what we ought to give him, what we chose to receive from him in the Torah. I'll just close with one last point and then we'll finish. The luchos are set up as two segments, right? Or 5 and 5. There were two panels, luchos, right? Two panels, 5 and 5. And generally speaking, the commentaries explain that on the first panel, on the first luach, are the 5 mitzvahs that are being adam l'makom, right? That relate to us and Hashem. Anochi Hashem lekach lo yilecha, Shabbos, and so on, things that relate to Hashem. And on the second is the things that relate to other humans. And the tzaddikim draw connections between each of these 5 with the others, and they highlight the way in which they are sets of parallels, they're pairs. What's the first one on the first luchos? Anochi Hashem lekach. I am Hashem, your God. Do you know what the first one is on the second panel? Lo sirtzach. You shall not murder. Because there is an inextricable link between the consciousness that prevents us from murdering the other with all of its derivatives and recognizing Anochi Hashem Elokecha. And that's Shavuos. That's Shavuos. That's what it means. It's not just to receive lots of laws and things to learn and read. It means to be awake to the essence of Kol HaTorah Kula, which is, in a phrase, other consciousness. And if we can do that this Shavuos and become a little bit more sensitive to others in every aspect, then we're zocha to a Kabbalas HaTorah in our own lives. We should be zocha be'ezus Hashem to have a Shavuos that's saturated with meaning and depth and clarity and every exalted encounter with our family and friends, with others, bein adam l'chavero, and our ultimate encounter with HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chavaydai u'ba'atzmai be'ezus Hashem.